tool. That sounded like a lot of work. I did have a laptop for you though. Well, we're too late.
You're fine.
Yes, yes.
Anyway,
We can take a pause so you can set up.
Unless you're dying to be Periscope.
no, I can survive without Periscope. So anyway, so getting them to eject it was a big problem. So I had created I figured out using Composer that it's a good one.
Grab control.
I know, I appreciate it. So I had found out there's actually a file on your computer. I used Composer to figure it out. There's a file on your computer that gets written to every time you unplug from power on your machine. And all it does is write down when you unplugged or when you plugged in. And that's literally the only thing that this file is for. I was really excited to find, I used Composer to do it, where I just essentially, I ran file system changes, unplugged, plugged in, hit stop as quickly as possible so as to minimize the cruft that I would have to look through, and I found this. And so I created a launch agent at first, because I figured it was for user and run user level. Not thinking, though, that the file that I set it to watch for, it didn't have permission to look at. And so it worked super intermittently. Sometimes it actually would work magically, but other times it definitely did not. And then it would just start failing. So if you don't pay attention to your ownership, you're going to have a bad time. Yes. But these are the primary places where you keep it. So for launch agents, we have tilde library launch agents, then we have library launch agents, and then system library launch agents.
Sorry.
Okay. So system library launch agents, that's in red because you shouldn't use it. You're not supposed to use it. It's for Apple stuff. Don't do it. You have to answer?
Yes.
Hey, man, how's it going?
Hey.
How
You're
So-
gonna Jeremy introduce
Yeah, do you want to, come on, introduce yourself.
Hello.
And then apologize for being late.
Hello, this is my first time in this area. Hello, I'm Jeremy Reitman. I work for Tandem Technologies. And
Movies?
Come, Jerry.
Yeah, so the system library launch daemons and system library launch agents, you don't use them. You can look at them and like see what's going on, but Apple very highly recommends. Let me go back one.
Yeah, I'm totally not going to be able to use it.
Anyway, so yeah, and then ownership, anything that ends up for launch daemons needs to be root and wheel for owner. And then user level, if it's in /library, it needs to be root wheel. If it's in the user's library though, it actually is owned by the user. Even though this, by the way, is owned by root wheel, it still executes as the user. So the primary difference between these two is happens after you log in, happens before. And the big separator that you need to keep in mind when you're using them is if you're using launch daemons, technically speaking, you are not supposed to do anything that will call up any system UI. So you're not supposed to have any dialogues pop up or any of that. You can. It's just Apple makes no guarantees that things will work for you. So nothing terrible happens. It's just it might not do what you want it to. An example, and I'll show you how it works with my computer. The one that I wrote for handling the backup drives. So I've got my backup drive here. I will swipe over to my desktop, and I plug in. It'll mount in a second here. So it's mounted. If I unplug my computer from power, so the whole argument that I made with my users was, if you're going to unplug from your monitor, just unplug your power first, then your Thunderbolt cable, which is a much lower threshold action to get them to do instead of click on the drive and hit eject or like drag the icon to the trash. So when I unplug power, that pops up, and then I get a dialog that says it's safe to eject. So in this situation, I'm calling UI from a launch daemon, but I know very specifically that it really only runs when the user is on their machine and doing something. So I'm not as concerned about it. But if a user were to be at the lock screen image, it will not pop up and it will not work because it won't let it call the UI. But anyway, so that's the primary thing to keep in mind. It's really just the ownership, keeping track of your ownership. So next is the just basic format. Pretty much everybody I know that makes launch daemons or launch agents does the same thing, which is they'll find something that looks exactly like this and then copy and paste it. And but I guarantee that there is maybe one person who has ever written doc type plist public and then all of that content after it, just the guy that came up with it, and then everybody else has copy pasted from that point forward. But the primary things to keep in mind. So your agent or daemon, and usually from an administrative standpoint, most of the stuff that I'm doing are daemons because I'll be having to do things that are in the background, prepping things for extension attributes in the JSS. So how many people here use Jamf, by the way? Awesome, that makes this much more targeted.
No comment.
Jamf extension attributes are great, but the problem is if there's a possibility that it will run and return nothing on a check-in, it'll return nothing and then remove the information from the JSS that was there previously, which is a huge nuisance if you do things based off of smart groups, because it'll just drop people out of your smart groups if you're not careful. So the best workaround for this is writing stuff to disk and then creating your scripts to actually look at a text file that you write to. So a lot of times I'll drop like a dot file into VarDB that just sits there and keeps content for me. And that's what I do with the Thunderbolt displays. It writes to a file, and then I can guarantee it'll say, if it can't access a Thunderbolt display, then it just reads from that file instead, and it'll upload that. So what we do with this is we make our plist, and you name it something along the lines of com.company. Whatever your application is called, .plist. So for my backup ejector, it's com.aweber.ejector.plist is the name of the file. And I drop that into my launch daemons folder, and we got all this junk. Your label is what it's going to show up as when you run launch CTL list. Okay, so everything that we do to interact with loading these things, unloading them, troubleshooting them, is with launch CTL. And so I run list, and it'll show up as com.company.app, right? You don't put the plist on the end of that. You can, but it doesn't do anything. And then the primary thing here is we have program. So if I'm doing just one thing where I'm running a script, I can just run program and then have a path to my script. If I want to do something a bit more complicated, like actually write out an argument in shell or something like that, and pass a couple of arguments, I can run what's it called? Program arguments. So I'll actually pull up here for you guys. Actually got my password right on the first time. Miracle. Library / daemons. So this is my ejector plist. Let me Can you guys see that okay? All right, cool. So for this one, program arguments, it actually just points straight to there. And I also have another key here that's called watch paths. And watch paths, the whole thing is you can point it to a directory or you can point it to a file. And if that file or directory is touched in any way, it'll execute the launch data. Okay? So for me, this is that file I mentioned. It's literally private var root library preferences, com.apple.telemetry.battery.chargecycle.plist. That file, its only purpose is to list when you plugged in or not. So if I, on the one next to it, I can actually take this and we can do you know, it's in a different format. If I were to open it though, it literally just says like date, time when it did it. But I actually don't care about that too much. My ejector script checks it, and all it does is a bit of math to check if I'm plugging in or unplugging. Because I only wanted to actually do the final action on an unplug. I wanted to eject my drive when I plug in because that'd be bad. But it's able to track that using this watch paths argument. There's a lot of different arguments that we can use. So I don't know why Keynote does that, but anyway. This is a ton of arguments, and I'm just going to mention a couple of them, ones that I found to be particularly useful, and then I'll show you what my Thunderbolt display one looks like. So label, it's required. You have to have a label. It's how launch CTL shows what's there. Run it load, that's totally optional. So run it load says the moment that it loads, it runs. So if this is a launch agent, it won't do anything until the user logs in, but the moment the user logs in, it's going to execute whatever its arguments are. It can then have things that tell it to run again later under certain circumstances, but it's going to load the moment the user logs in. If it's a launch daemon, it's going to load pretty much when the computer comes up. Launch D starts checking for stuff pretty early on in the boot cycle. So it's pretty useful to have run it load the launch daemon. It just depends on what it's doing. It'll also wait until it can actually execute the command, or it'll fail. Watch paths, what we're talking about, it'll actually look for any changes to a directory or a single file. Q directories, it actually allows you to list multiple directories, and if anything gets tossed into one of those directories or moved out of one of those directories, it'll execute your arguments. There's a really clever solution you can actually use this for, which is if you have non-admin users and you want them to have the ability to do an administrative task, I can actually give them a directory that if they drop content into it, it'll run a script that has root access. And they don't have access to that script or to the launch daemon that's running it, but the action of them modifying the file it's looking at will automatically execute that other script. So this also works if I'm doing my watch path. It can literally be, I make a Apple script that when I run it, it just touches a file, and then it's going to execute it. Yes, sorry. So it'll execute it, and you're good to go. So start on mount. This can be specifically when a drive is. So if you're giving out a drive, you can have it look for specific volumes. The moment they mount, it does certain actions the moment that item mounts. It's going to be great for network shares as well. Have certain actions take place when they actually map the network share.
Does that have to be specifically like a main drive, or can it be a type of drive? USB stick? Or any sort of external drive?
I'm going to be honest, I've actually never used it. So I'd have to Google an example of it. I just know that it's one of the ones that I hear people talking about using fairly frequently. It has served me no purpose. So it's a good question. Start interval, you can actually just say that it runs every number of seconds. So if you use Jamf, as most of you do, that plist actually just has in it start interval whatever your check-in threshold is. So it's usually 15 minutes. So 15 minutes in seconds, I think it's like 1,300 or something like that. One of those numbers you come across. Start calendar interval. I'm going to show you guys a website that solves this for you because it's a huge pain in the butt to write out. And there's a really useful website where you can just type in an actual date and time setup, and it'll figure it all out for you. But this is great because you can actually set certain tasks to only run once a week or every other day during the week and only on specific times. So if you have, like we have signage machines all around the building, if I didn't have a JSS that they were checking into on a regular basis, I can actually tell LaunchD to execute cleanup scripts and things like that every night at the midnight hour, right? So very useful. Standard out is awesome because you can make sure that it writes the standard out of the scripts that it runs to a specific location. And I'll show you guys in a second something that I found that to be very useful for. Working directory, it's just a CD. It tells it to move into a directory before it executes it. Keep alive, it makes sure that the thing runs under all circumstances, no matter what happens. So for the prank that I played on my friend, where it played that song repeatedly, I set keep alive to true, so that you really had a hard time getting rid of it. Launch only once guarantees that it will only launch once during the boot cycle. So if you want, you can make sure that there, under no circumstances would it ever launch again without rebooting the machine. User and group, you can actually, this is for launch daemons only, executes commands as a specific user or as a specific group. You can use them together or one and not. Program arguments, it's what we were talking about. It's where we can put in a string of commands. And then standard error path, just like standard out, this will put out your standard error. And then debug, I actually haven't played with very much, but it adds, it makes sure that stuff gets flagged properly so that it shows up in console. So, examples. I showed you guys this one, which is great, but since you guys use Jamf, this might be useful for you. So I had a horrible issue over the past month and a half, which was a bunch of my computers just stopped checking in and stopped doing inventory updates, and it was totally random, and I had no way of figuring out what it was without just disabling every policy in my JSS and one after another doing it. Because if I ran, I could kill off the, essentially it would start the inventory and policy execution, and then just hang. And you just sit there, and if I killed all of the Jamf processes that were running, I could run again, and it would oftentimes execute successfully, no problem. I could run it with debug, with verbose mode on, but it wasn't giving me enough information. It was random when it was happening. So I couldn't just sit there and type verbose mode over and over and over again on computers until I finally got something that failed. So I was working with Jamf, and they weren't really sure what was going on. We were both lamenting the fact that there's no verbose debugging for Jamf check-ins. But I decided to poke around, and what I noticed was Jamf runs its check-in process off of a launch daemon. So in library, launch daemons, com.jamf software, you have the startup plist, the Jamf daemon plist, and then you actually have task 1 plist, and this is your recurring check-in plist. When we look in it, we can discern what's going on pretty easily. Our program arguments say to run user sbin jamf policy random delay seconds 300. Okay, so this is the format that's super annoying, by the way. If you want to run a command directly in the plist, every single argument in the string needs to be on a separate line, which gets really annoying really fast, and that's why they don't recommend that you do anything complex in the actual daemon itself. Point it to a script if you have to do more than a single line, because you'll go crazy. Yes?
It's also the answer to Serge's question about, can I see what kind of disk was mounted? The idea is, launch D just says, was the disk mounted? You're
supposed to write a script.
Right.
There.
You do the intelligence in your script.
You do the logic. And so then we have start interval, 900 seconds, that's 15 minutes, 900 seconds. And then username runs as root. That's actually redundant. I don't really know why they include that, because it runs as root by default if it's in the launch daemons folder in the library. So this is the default version of it. I wrote a script, though, that is Jamf verbose check-ins. And essentially, this rolls out a replacement for that. That actually, instead of doing the regular user sbin jamf and that, it runs shell command. This is a little cheat so that you can write more complex commands, because you get to run this all as one string instead of putting every argument in a separate line. And it says echo starting date, and echo starting and then date. And I do this for logging purposes. It actually, at the end, I'll show you, it spits out a log, so I can keep track of when this is taking place. And it runs user sbin jamf policy desk random delay settings 300 -- verbose. So it actually just changed their plist to always run in -- verbose. And then I set down here that I want it to do standard out path to var log jamf v.log. So I get my own separate log that logs all of the information for every check-in, and I can run this on an individual user's computer. You're making a face like you're upset.
I'm not upset.
Okay. You don't like this?
No, it's not that I don't like it. You are replacing that with this?
Yes.
You're not doing a randomized trigger for it to go on? I mean, they can be as random as when it gets replaced, right? But they're going to be a storming herd if you replace multiple computers at the same time.
No, I specifically did this. I would find
This is diagnostics only?
Yes, this is not.
This is not
company-wide.
low replacement.
No, absolutely not. This is if you have users that are having problems, or if you're trying to diagnose an issue that's random, you'll pick a user, run this for a couple of days, and then you'll get a solid log file that actually will show you a lot more data. So my script, the way this runs, and this is actually how I recommend you distribute launch daemons in general to the JSS. Don't package them as a file that you then dump in. Do it as a shell script that you can just echo the file in. The benefit there is that you can edit things really quickly. You never have to repackage anything. You're just working with text anyway, so there's no reason to get into making PKGs or DMGs and having to have it mount something. And you can also cache this locally. It doesn't really take up much. And you can build in logic at the front, like I do, which makes sure that if it already exists, it'll unload. This one actually backs up. The other one moves it and then does this. That's actually technically unnecessary because I can undo this by just running Jamf manage. The Jamf manage will blow all of this out and take care of it. But with this, I was able to run it, and within one day, I found the solution for what was hanging up my issue. Because I noticed the log would run, and it would stop, and it would tell me exactly which policy it was on and exactly what it was doing. And I got the information that I needed, despite the fact that Jamf was not able to help me with the phone because they have no verbose logging of any kind. So that was a pain. And then, yeah, so that's that. Do you guys have any questions about that one, by the way? Does it make any sense? Does it make sense to everybody?
So what was the policy that was the problem?
You guys heard of Yo?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, Shay.
yeah, so I've had some conversations with Shay. He's running into an issue that he doesn't really know how to deal with currently. But essentially, there are circumstances under which Yo can't post, and instead of ever erroring out, the process just sits there. And Jamf has no timeout functionality on its check-ins. So it would just sit in that state. And it compounded on itself because my solution was running a kill-all on all of the Jamf stuff, clearing that out, and then it might actually run again, and perhaps they changed their password. And they were going to be getting a notification saying you hadn't changed your password. So it runs the next time, and it's fine. But then the Yo process actually just hangs around indefinitely. It just never goes away. And then you can't use any other Yo stuff. And so essentially, they ended up stacking. I found users that had like 13 frozen Yo processes that were just sitting there. And so I killed those, and immediately everything runs forward. But the problem is, once Jamf is in the middle of a check-in process, it will refuse to do anything else. You can't run Jamf manage when it's in the middle of a policy. It won't say, I'm going to exit out of the policy and then run Jamf manage. It'll say, I'll execute this when Jamf is done doing its Jamf stuff. So I was running into a lot of issues with it. But that's really what it came down to. And adding that flag really helped me out. So when you look, a lot of applications that use might throw launch daemons in or launch agents for handling certain things. They become a great avenue for debugging as well, because you can go in and you can modify them yourself, as long as you back up what was there previously and get them to do a little bit extra. So these are the 3 sites, by the way, that I found to be the most useful for getting stuff taken care of. So launchd.info, you've probably stumbled across this in Googling to get stuff. So I'll do I'm really freaked out, by the way, by Spotlight's thing where I'll be 3 letters in and it'll give me what I want, and I'll do 1 more letter that it shares in common with a different app, and then it just switches to that one. But I'll do 1 more letter than that, and it'll jump back. Yeah. It's like if you have to get it just perfect. But anyway, so let's take a look here. I don't want those to launch Safari, that's why I'm doing it this way. So this website is awesome. It has demonstrations of pretty much everything. It has some troubleshooting items, contains pretty much all the information you need. It can be a little annoying to navigate though, and also you can't link directly to individual tabs. It's all JavaScript-y stuff. So that makes it really annoying to share this content with anybody else. But you can browse through everything in here, all kinds of great examples. Other thing, if you want to actually just play around with browsing the launch daemons on your computer itself, launch control is awesome. It gives you a GUI for actually, it looks like the AppleScript automator setup, where you can drag and drop elements in, fill in the field, and then it will just generate the field for you. It also allows you to see all of your running launch daemons and check them on or off, load them, unload them. It gives you a lot of control over.
It's also good for debugging. If it doesn't load properly, you get a nice little red flag saying it did not load.
Yes, because you will find out as you play with these more, launch daemons really don't tell you a lot about what went wrong. They'll just say failed to load, and then with file not found. That's basically all you get. So this is super useful. And the one that I learned about recently that has been a big lifesaver is this one, where it's just a web form, and the reason that it's great is entirely based around the schedule section, okay? So this schedule section, you can type in what minute, hour, day of the month you want it to do, and then also specific months of the year, and all of that. This is stuff where in a cron tab, looks like a single line of just stars and numbers, and it's like clean. It's hard to read, but you can use like a calculator online to do it. I'll show you what these look like and why you want to use this. So just as an example, let's say I wanted to at midnight, just before midnight, every day, every January, every other month, and then every other day, right, to run. And I say, I'm going to call it test, and then my command is just echo hello. I want to run this. This is what that actually ends up looking like. And it's just a lot more typing than you really want to do to get things laid out. So this will just do it for you. And you can see he uses the -C methodology so that I could then, if I wanted to, do echo hello, semicolon, following statement, and do it all in one line instead of having to break it out into echo as a string, hello as a string, That's pretty much it. The whole thing about launching is just being able to trigger stuff when you need it. And you'll spend a lot less time with the daemons themselves as you will with getting a good script that handles the background logic for things, and not having to worry about triggering. Does anybody have any questions? Cool. I believe you're up.
Talk amongst yourselves because it's going to take me a little while to BBAB call.
Well, in the meantime, just so everybody knows, our next meeting will be August 20th. We'll be back at the Golden Street office. I believe, we could probably announce that September meeting, which I was able to exactly
Interface Systems, it's in Bluebell, right by the Plymouth Meeting Mall.
And we have some other things coming as well. We'll have We're hopefully very posting slides of our meetings as well as resources that we talk about. Maybe video if we have. So, and let me see if I have these. So I know everybody was pushing the Slack earlier. Do I have these? Oh, I grabbed a bunch of cards from Vanessa. I see two. I did.
All right.
Aha. Does anybody not know what Slack is? So Slack is a communication tool, like social media. A lot of businesses use it for inter-office communication. But we have one as Mac admins, where Mac admins all around the world get together and talk about Mac admins and related nerd type things.
Thank you.
Anybody not on Slack that needs to?
I'm on Slack. I'm not part of the.
Sure you want to work there?
More than enough.
Yeah.
Small line.
Right. What's it do about it? So we should probably have more. Depends. Yes, we're usually the third.
I think it was like the 17th, was the third
Where do you
Thursday.
recommend the park in Philly?
There is there's a garage nearby that the Apple Store. Well done.
Bowman. Can you, I guess, some directions, from
Yeah. We'll post direction.
I mean, we'll see, depending on the day. It's not easy sometimes getting out of work at, normal hours.
Thank you. Yeah, and then by the way, so the way that I control my presentations, I'm a huge nerd, is I have this muscle leader that actually leads electrical impulses that go to your forearm muscles and different gestures. Don't be jealous. Yeah, it can sense full motion as well. So, but for presentations, it's great because you can sort of move wherever you want to. And you don't have to feel that in your
How much is more red?
What? Yeah.
I have no idea. Maybe.
I forget because I bought it like 2 years ago pre-order, and then it arrived after I quit Springboard Media when I didn't need to do presentations anymore. Because I used to do professional development.
You want to just copy what I present?
I think you should often do motions and write sound effects.
$200 on the Meetup page, the discussion.
MYO.
I think I have.
That's it, it's $100. I have it in my wish list, I didn't know.
Yeah. It's all working. The only thing is I gesticulate a lot. Yeah, so every once in a while in general, it's really.
So rather than somebody having to operate this for me, let's see how dumb this looks.
You got a
See,
class holding a
this is the kind of stuff that it's pretty media. I used to solve problems like this. And they get really angry.
Yes.
It works.
Oh my god. I need a picture of this.
That's awesome, man. Oh, did you guys hear that the banned selfie stick
Yeah.
for people?
Yeah, well,
Now live. Oh boy. Let's go a little bit further back, why don't we? This is the type of thing that people really want to see.
Yes.
Let's see how horrible that is. Ah, so that almost doesn't stop it. All right.
That's how I used to solve every series. But he knew that he didn't watch it. So I thought it was happen. It's like I was.
Okay. Oops, I've been demoted. That's what that was right there.
Well, time's up.
I think this is the Google thing.
No, it's because
where-
or no, I don't even know. I think the projector's fully off though, which is good. No, we have to wait now for everything to shut off. I think it's on a timer. So, by the way, everything in our building is controlled by Lutron. It's like LEED Gold certified building, so like everything's fully automated, well beyond what is necessary, and it's all energy saving. So yeah, I think we just hit the
7 o'clock, whatever.
so-
yeah, 7 o'clock. Everything just starts turning off, which is awesome for things like this. So yeah, it'll just be a minute, and then get that back up.
Oh, and oh yeah, well, it turns off all notifications as soon as you go into presentation mode.
Well, did you put on the in case you jump out of it? Do not disturb.
Yeah, I gotta think it. Okay, well,
Things that it's done
we
yet.
don't necessarily need my first slide for me to get started, and this is going to descend at some point. It's going to be so theatrical. So, as it said on the Meetup invite, my name is Allister Banks. For a change of pace, I'll be discussing iOS security. I am not actually responsible, even though I am in the Apple team, and we do iOS, among other things, but I work for a company called Monitor Health Systems. We used to be Monitor Medical Center. We used to have a light in our projector. We used to be emerging health IT because we were like spun out, and we do data centers for different hospitals in the area. We have 4-digit iOS devices, maybe going to be 5 over the next couple of years or sooner, but we're only at 3-digit max at this moment. My boss had this stat about our organization.
that were responsible for the most emergency room visits in possibly the country, if not the world. We have a lot of people who go through our emergency room, which is not great for them. It's also not great for care in general. But anyway, I'm the technical lead is my title. It's like I used to analyze desktops. I'm not sure what the big difference is in all those things. I'm totally missing my selfie stick, aren't I? Sorry. I need my notes because I put this together possibly somewhat hastily. Come on, work with me. I know you want to. It'll be fun. So, I'm primarily known in the admin community for administering Macs, but I previously ran trainings for the Fruit Company's VAR program. So I would go to the Virginia area somewhat often, and I had the extreme honor and pleasure of writing a small book with a guy named Charles Edge for Pact Publishing, which I'm not saying that anyone has to run out and buy. Anyway, this is considered a Mac admin meetup, but I'm going to hopefully hit y'all with an overview of the security-specific features that are built into iOS, and show off just like some of my notes that help me understand the topic a little better. Although you admittedly could just read the 55-page white paper on the topic that did get updated somewhat recently. Notice that they're very smart with their timing of updating it. They update it before the next one is released. That improves your shelf life immeasurably, doesn't it? Regarding the content in it. Anyway, get right into it. As you should all probably know, they did not go with the Linux variant on the iPods when they came up with what OS was going to run on the iOS devices. They decided that along with the iPhone, iPod, iPad, the iPod Touch, that they would go with the kernel from OS X. WatchOS continues this inheriting of that. And so OS X can be loosely considered the father of them all, as everything evolved from that kernel. Experience-wise, the similarities pretty much end there, although Command-Tab app switching is coming to iOS 9. It's public information. That is a feature of it. Other keyboard and productivity enhancements are coming with iOS 9. They're the rare instance of bringing Mac to iOS. But when it comes to sheer volume of unit sales, you can kind of tell innovation-wise which side of Apple's bread is buttered. For the Mac admin crowd, however, I fear this to be kind of the same training that you probably encountered when you were first studying for like an OS X certification test, if you took one of those. That is, you're expected to know how to debug and troubleshoot the boot process. So what kind of is that on this appliance-like black box of an iOS device? But I'm going to just try to help you be aware of the moving parts, the elements that are involved in it, because they are the foundation that security needs to be built upon. There will be no listing of security restrictions, no tools you'd use when interacting with managing the device. So no MDMs, just security architecture. It's a little bit dry. And my graphics are immense, and that's why I went to the masters to try to intersperse with all the things that help your eyes, help your brain ooze out of your ears, reset a little bit. But so, getting into it, why they started out on a path to have iOS be, in my opinion, head and shoulders above all commercially available OSs, portable OSs, when it comes to security. It's kind of a good question. It's hard to put faith in the review process that they use for all these apps that are the clearinghouse through which they actually get on the device. That's not exactly the only thing holding the barbarians at the gates, which we'll touch on later. As you may recall from the first waves that people ran third-party apps on the device before the existence of the App Store, they exploited bugs. You call them jailbreaks. I can call them exploits. So for Apple wanting to sell you apps or control access to the platform, their business incentive to have it be secure actually helps them focus their priorities, because it's in their best interests to have something where it is locked down. Apologies to Arthur C. Clarke's 3 laws. but a sufficiently lackadaisical security stance is indistinguishable from a bug-ridden, crappy co-opted experience. And if you have to call 911 at the side of the road, you don't want your phone to crash, among other things. You know, it's like it all helps with the experience if you don't have something going awry on you. Us Mac admins and network folks and dev folks know that this is not anything like the way it is on OS 10, most noticeably when it comes to the lack of, I don't know, utilizing Intel's cluster protection module, and therefore exploits like Thunderstrike, which are real and really egregious, won't happen as much on this whole platform. Anyways, now we're going to get into my Cliff Notes lecture-like summation of Apple's security white paper when it comes to the boot process all the way through user land and apps. I put these things together and I felt that they could use more exposition. I wasn't going to go over stuff that was specifically in the white paper in the book. So I point to that, even though I gave a ground level of that. So I'm going to rip some stuff apart. It helped me of the questions that I was asking myself to make sure that I understood the entire process, to make these graphics and then rip them apart and see some type of flow. So, LaunchD is still process 0 on the phone, just the same. But we have a chain of trust from firmware before we even get to this OS. So, device gets made in the factory. What's in there that when you power it on happens and triggers a chain reaction in order. We have to validate these things by having something to trust in the firmware. Otherwise, you assume that things are tampered with and you just make it non-functional. So we start with the private keys needed for the device, and reminder to turn off my sound. Is that something like that? Well, we'll boot, and you'll know that I'm using the pointer. That's good. So it needs to have its own identity. It is an individual device. It needs to have a group key for you to tell what class of devices it is at the time that it is manufactured, and Apple's root certs. So Apple's CA, you need to load that on with trust. It's actually pretty interesting to me how they make the device secret, how they generate that secret on the device at the factory. But I'm not here to put you to sleep. It is, however, something that's so well protected that Apple's QA personnel, not the people in the factory assembling it, have to be present at the time of generation. So, tinfoil hat folks, that's for you. So I could get deeper into that, but the cryptographic operations need a firm foundation to stand on. So we have the keys. It knows itself before it gets started. It goes into the low-level bootloader. It gets the handoff from that read-only firmware. Boot ROM. It's supposed to be read-only. This is so awesome, though. Like, I like it. It's like it's accompanying me. It's not exactly on flute, but it in turns. So when you were studying about the Mac OS, the mock kernel said, "Okay, what am I going to load?" And way back when, it was saying, "Hey, you're going to boot OS 9 or OS 10, right?" So there was a abstraction layer in there to say, "Hey, which OS am I then going to hand off to?" And we're all Apple. We're all friends, right? Before boot camp, before there was things that were more legitimizing, you would know that you were only going to hand off to Apple OSs. But this way, you know, you have an OS update, things like that. You have that layer of abstraction in the stack to begin with. So if anything happens when it comes to validation between here and here, between here and here, you're going to get the very handsome connect to iTunes icon, which is now red. So that is how you know that something has gone very wrong, error, bomb, error occurred. When the new OS version comes along and you install it, it needs to activate. It calls Phone's Home. It says, "Hey, I'm going to activate this software now because there's been a change in my OS. I'm going from one thing to another. If you have run a new version of the OS and you try to put the old version on it, it will not activate. This is always moving forward, and you're like, oh gosh darn, Apple, you got me on this treadmill, this is horrible. How's about the security bugs that they fixed only in the new platform? They will not allow you to roll back. How do they do that? They have a big old spreadsheet. They put the device's key in that spreadsheet. When the device then checks in afterwards, they can validate, hey, there's this device. They don't care about any other tracking on the device. They just want to know, like, hey, did somebody check in and ask for an OS? Okay, they're on a new OS now. Don't let them activate the old OS. So this is a way that you hear about trainers, and they're like, oh, come to our iOS cracking course. Guess what? We're running iOS 7. Don't restore the device. Because if you restore the device, they have one less device to use. Because when it restores, it's going to phone home and ask for a newer OS. That process is referred to as system software authorization. So I like those are the things that are in the white paper, but not really in the white paper, because they're not going to try to spell it all out to you. It's too contentious to really go over. Well, why is it that way, and how does it actually implement itself? So zooming in on more recent developments, because again, this stuff is newer, and we're getting closer to the OS. We're getting closer to the common era. Is that sleeping gonna make it unhappy? I don't know for the folks at home. Okay, so as of the A7 and iPhone 5S, we have the Secure Enclave, which I love being able to pronounce properly, for dedicated cryptographic processing. It's essentially a section on the CPU. It's not actually distinct, but it takes that overhead off of the main CPU. It's also responsible back here, sorry, for verifying the baseband. If you are relying on your cellular to be secure and intact, it's kind of nice that within that CPU, it takes that overhead away from you, and you can't with the regular CPU. If the regular CPU got somehow compromised, you won't be able to interrupt that or otherwise compromise the cellular communication. That's kind of nice. The memory is encrypted for it. It has its own file system space. It has specific fingerprinting of, hey, I know how to move all of these things forward from my root of trust, my secret that I have. That's how it moves forward. So the question to me was, okay, what did they do before they had this? The sensors on the device for gyroscope, things like that. One might think that just like, how when you make an SSH key or something, they ask you to shake the mouse around or something like that to add entropy. That could possibly be how it is. They're kind of like, oh, but let's talk about our new devices. Like, yeah, I'm not going to ask Apple that and get an answer necessarily. So the Secure Enclave is also, with that storage for it, is where your fingerprints actually get sent. It doesn't go anyplace else. That secure element, however, is all about Apple Pay. So this has one when it comes to a
it can also generate a reverse shell to any server that I have set up and keep that running permanently from that point forward. And all I have to do is, if you're not paying attention, I could have somebody behind Surge say, hey, quick question. He turns away. I go, click, undone, totally rooted the machine. Or you drop this outside of the company, right by the front door. Because the first thing people do is they pick something up, come in, and they plug it into their computer. And if you're a regular user and you see terminal blink on the screen really quickly, you're not going to do anything. You might ask somebody, and then your admin will come over and they'll be like, I don't know, up. I mean, you've never used this before. And you're done. So full new admin account, full new version of Bash on it that I can execute any Bash commands that I want to at root in less than a second. Yes?
What was this called?
There's no name for it.
Where would we find more information about it?
You can find, I will pull up on my computer here, so you can read about it and keep track of it. I was complaining about it on Facebook earlier today. I posted it, but I didn't post a link to it because, like I said, he literally posts the entire script, which I find to be.
You need that Ducky device in order to do this, or can anybody just download that
The
script?
difference, the Ducky, what it provides is an ability for me to not to have to type in.
Okay.
Right? Yes.
How is it creating that shell?
That's what privilege escalation is. So
That's what
I will pull up here Safari.
So say you copy the bash shell to a new one, and you make it so that standard users can execute as root because set UID. So they don't have it. Theoretically.
If you guys haven't seen this, by the way, Quiver is a really cool application. It's a notebook for keeping track of things. It'll do proper parsing of pretty much every programming language. You do that sort of stuff, and it's just for keeping notes. So you can intersperse regular with code language. So this is the actual article. So it's the DYLD print to file local privilege escalation vulnerability. Doesn't really have a cool name. I guess you could call it like the diamond. But anyway, so he shows off a couple of different things here. The primary one is if you run this command on your computer, and this is a generally safe command to run as a test, you could easily make an extension attribute in the JSS to keep track of machines that are vulnerable or haven't run patches. Although, to be honest, it's probably going to be patched. Hopefully, when the next beta of 10.10.5 comes out. If not, waiting on 10.10.6. But you can run that, and this will generate a file at the root level. And you'll be able to just ls your root and see that it did it and know that you're fully vulnerable. So there's that. And then this is his protection method I am 100% against, which is he wrote his own kernel extension that modifies the DYLD process so that it doesn't do the thing that it does anymore.
Cure is better than the harm, right? Cure is better than disease.
Yeah, no, I'm not a fan of doing that. But anyway, this is the script that he wrote. So it literally redirects, because with the DYLD process just allows you to write text to any file you want to with any permissions. That's the problem, is you can redirect this output and use it to write text wherever you want, just ignoring permission. So what he does is writes all of this down and then compiles it. And it's compiled and it's written as root.
We need GCC though.
Yeah. Which your machine has.
You only have sleep command lines.
I don't, even if you do, you can.
You can get it on the machine, yes.
Or this is proof of concept for this methodology only.
Right.
Because you can write to any file you want to. You could also just write shell scripts that do whatever you want. So like I could write a launch daemon into the launch daemons folder, and then my script would execute on next instead of daemons, right? Which, if anything, just further to me from implication. It's not until you boot next and node remembers what you did. Yeah, and it just generates and runs that and switches you into root immediately. So keep an eye out for this because obviously it's really bad. And local execution, though it sounds like you're secure from it, attention is a resource, and nobody has enough of it to actually keep their machine fully protected from somebody touching it. And there's also the fact that people plug stuff in. I mean, think about the number of times you've been in a bank and they have like a PC on a desk or like under it, and all the USB ports are facing you. Like that's terrible because you could be talking and literally just do that. As long as you distract them long enough that it can both command prompt, so it's over. Anyway. Cool. So we're at the end here. If anybody has any questions, let me know. I'm going to be hanging around for a little while. You guys can chill for a bit. You can take the slides if you want to. Just let me know so I can walk you upstairs. I can't just have you run in the building. But yeah, and then our next meeting is going to be at Apple Walnut Street. What's the date?
August 20th.
August 20th. So Walnut Street Apple Store in their nice little conference room. And that'll be the goal moving forward. And we'll probably stick to it, but no promises, is that every other month will be at the Apple Store on Walnut Street. And that's kind of like the default home base. And then we might go to some different people's offices, depending on what can happen. And we might come back here just so that we can get a good group. Because obviously the greater Philadelphia area travel's a little bit weird. Some people like the city, other people hate it. So make sure we meet the mix. Cool.
The thing is, our website's now live.
So that is, what is the website again? PhillyMag. Ta-da. So you'll be able to find updates and things here. And we'll be posting more, obviously, it just got up. And then in addition, always you can join us in the Slack, the Philly Slack room, the Mac admin Slack. And then you cool with giving us your presentation so that we can post it?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Whoever wants to gratify me,
Cool.
that's great.
We'll touch base with you about getting it. And yeah, so that's that, I guess. Thanks for coming out, everybody. I hope you learned stuff and had fun. And get out.
Thanks for hosting us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there a general banter room?
We can do general banter.
Yeah, you guys can do whatever you want. There's also, we will have to clear it at some point. There's a bar literally like just over there for anybody that wants to hang out a little longer.
I'm game for that. I know not everybody is. Some people have long drives.
Yeah.
Except for one.
Well, what's better before a long drive? Just like a couple,
All right.
I drive.